right, Ryan. Well, it's good to chat with you this morning. It's morning where I am. Anyway, it's probably almost afternoon for you, I think. But looking at your pin post on X, I've been following you for a little bit, and a lot of your story resonates with me, and I wanted to connect with you and chat, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of people. And I think personally and professionally, we have there's a lot of overlap with us. Walked away from your Christian faith. You faced heavy drug, alcohol addiction. You moved between atheism, agnosticism, different faiths, different worldviews. Um, Take me to Thursday, August 25th,
Mm.
2022. You can back up to birth and bring us till now, however far you need to back up to tell your story. I want to hear it. I'm interested.
Yeah, I walked away from my faith in college. I learned a lot of new things, had a lot of discussions with people from different backgrounds. Some of it was just, meeting people who are either atheist or from different faiths and, wondering what makes my faith special, what makes me right and them wrong, essentially. I learned things that were starting to kind of destabilize my level of confidence in my faith. I learned about the theory of evolution by natural selection. So I brought into account the Genesis narrative. I think my kind of point that snapped me was learning that the end of the last chapter of the Gospel of Mark was probably added later on. I don't know why, but if I can't trust that, and it doesn't even I'm not even kind of looking back. I recently read the Gospel of Mark, and like it still contains the resurrection. There's just like some post-resurrection appearances that were kind of left out. But for some reason, that just was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back and kind of walked away, basically immediately started heavy drug and alcohol use. Um, Took me down a very dark road, tried to get sober in 2012. Um, Basically at that point, like, kind of left behind a lot of friends who were still using drugs and alcohol. And, all my new friends were in recovery. A lot of them were recovering heroin addicts. And after a period of over a few years, a lot of my closest friends had died from overdose. We didn't know it was fentanyl at that time. We just say he got a bad batch, is what we would say. But my friend, and, suicide, a couple of them, but just people dropping like flies and, had a rough go of things that kind of spiraled out of control, relapsed. Had two suicide attempts in 2015. Just in a very dark period of my life. Just looking back on it, like this idea of hell is the absence of God. I feel like that period of my life was hell in that sense, kind of in a literal sense, where it's just complete hopelessness, complete despair. I walked out of a hotel room New Year's Day, 2017, got sober. Um, you know, Life was improving for sure. It wasn't as bad as that kind of the horrific, ups and downs of addiction. But I still had bipolar disorder. I it was really rough with bipolar disorder. Rapid cycling with bipolar disorder is considered four or more cycles a year. I was having about 50 cycles a year, which, people who are like familiar with clinical literature, like, can you say that again? I think you misspoke. Like that was really what was going on. Like, psychiatrists were kind of stunned by what was going on. I was exhausted all the time. I'd fall asleep at work because I'm just constantly on this exhausting roller coaster. I had someone close to me tell me you need to go on disability because you're never going to be able to like support yourself or things like that. And I was in honors college at Baylor University. I went there on an academic scholarship. I was a very good student. I had a very bright future ahead of me. So for someone to tell me like you're just gonna have to go on disability, no shame for those who need it, but for me that was a huge blow to my self-confidence. I thought I'm never going to be able to accomplish anything in life. Um, yeah, I'm a failure is how I thought of it, and just dragging around this, kind of this burden on my back that I'm a college dropout, I'm mentally ill, I'm an addict, all this kind of stuff I'm carrying with me. Eventually went back to finish up my bachelor's degree at Baylor University. May 2022, I finished that degree and graduated. Even that semester, that spring semester, I had several major manic and depressive episodes. The whole semester was a roller coaster. I barely graduated. It was like the last 24 hours when I turned in all my lab reports and papers and aced my finals just kind of almost miraculously. Um, It was summer of 2022. One of the things I saw The Chosen for the first time. That first episode of The Chosen. I don't know if you've seen The Chosen,
Yeah,
but
my wife and kids watch it. I haven't gotten a
it's
chance to watch it yet, but
I like it. It's the first episode is the healing of Mary Magdalene. In the Bible, it talks about how she has seven demons that Jesus
yeah.
healed her of. But in the show, it shows her at a bar and she's drinking alcohol, I guess wine, and she's kind of hitting her head like something's not right in here. And I just started crying because I was like,
Mhm.
something's not right in here for me too. And I need to drink and use drugs to make what's in here calm down and quiet down. And then Jesus healed her, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen it in that way. But I kind of pushed that down, like this is a show, this is fiction, none of this actually happened. Um, and it was August 25th, 2022. It was after I'd gotten out of my grad school class. I was taking night classes. This is the first week of class, and I've been working on a family history book. And I had traced both sides of my family, my mom's side, and my dad's side, back to the Protestant Reformation. And a guy on my dad's side named John Rogers actually finished, William Tyndale translated the Bible into English, but he was burned at the stake before he finished. The guy who finished his work was John Rogers, who's my ancestor. And another guy on my mom's side, Dr. Roland Taylor, was one of the first pastors to preach that Bible in English.
Wow.
And when the kind of the Catholics came back to power in the Protestant Reformation, they didn't like those two, and they burned them at the stake. But what was so amazing to me was you know, the love that they showed even to their executioners was really powerful to me. And also the fact that they were willing to die for something like, I don't believe in anything in my life that much to be willing to die for it. It seemed really just jarring. And I just kind of had this moment where I was like, felt like I was in the presence of God. Like 3 straight hours of crying and then off and on crying for probably 2 weeks after that. And I had a number of these experiences, and I thought, I need to. I remember the parable of the seeds in Matthew that if you don't plant roots, you get scattered. And so I thought I gotta. I called my brother. I said I need to find a church. We found a church, and that was about 3 years ago. I've planted a lot of roots. I have a lot of really good people in my life that I lean on, and I am very happy with the way my spirit is connected to God, I would say.
That's amazing. It's fascinating. You mentioned the 50 cycles a year, and that's to clarify, that's essentially like highs and lows, right? Manics
Like
and
a manic and a depressive
okay,
episode, yeah.
right. It's interesting. You have this parallel with you hit a low point in your life and God speaks into your life, and then you kind of have this high point. You have this sort of like spiritual high. It sounds cheesy, but it's our faith walk is certainly that. We have highs and lows throughout our faith journey, for lack of a better term. But
Mm.
you mentioned finishing school, finishing college. What did you major in? Your career has sort of steered you in a unique direction, looking at the book behind you, and I have my copy of it here.
Oh yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Your
Yeah,
your journey has shaped you and kind of led you into a unique career, and I'd love to hear some more about that.
yeah. So studied psychology in undergrad. That's what my bachelor's was in. And then school, I graduate in December. It'll be a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. So I'm going for LPC to be a therapist. Yeah, it's that's uh, specializing in addiction. I guess my internships at addiction rehab.
Yeah. We need, from my experience, I mentioned, my background in justice studies. I have my master's degree in psychology with an emphasis in forensics,
Mm,
and my bachelor's in justice studies. And it's interesting to me. We see Christians, we see conservatives, people that lean conservative politically. They talk about, this is kind of my frustration with conservatives and Christians. They talk about atheism and the left and da 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 taking over these industries. And I'm like, we abandoned those industries. We
mm,
abandoned philosophy, psychology, mental health, these
mm.
clinical settings where we didn't have a voice anymore. And so I love the idea of you kind of bringing a faith perspective and bringing something that is, these are my experiences with God, bringing it into, letting it inform your career and shape your career. Um,
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I mean, I have plenty of blame for the left, but there's also blame to go around for the right, like you were saying. I've mentioned this a number of times, but I mean, you got people like Matt Walsh who basically say therapy is either worthless or harmful. Like it has no benefit. I mean, you got Abigail Schreier with bad therapy saying most therapy is worthless or harmful. You're getting into this in mental health, mental illness. This is a very real thing. We can debate on what the best way to handle that is, but people having severe disturbances or distress, that's a very real thing,
mhm,
and we're getting to this point where it's like politically coded, where it's like if you're a Democrat or left leaning, it's almost kind of like the cool thing for social capital to have a therapist. It's just something you should do,
mhm,
almost like I was talking to Wilfred Riley not too long ago about like having a Rolex or something is like having a therapist. It's like this, like a status symbol almost. Whereas if you're on the right, therapy is something you don't do.
yeah.
That's a woke liberal thing to do, and like you should, suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just get in the gym or hustle or whatever. And I think that's a very dangerous perspective, where one side trusts therapy too much
Mm.
and one side is too cynical and skeptical of it.
Yeah, I look at it, I kind of go back and forth. I wrestle with it a lot because I see the risk and I see the faults in secular therapy, for lack of a better term. Um, and I read scripture and I see since the very beginning, God has been counseling. God has been, Adam, what did you do? Adam, what are you doing? Interacting with humanity from the very beginning, God has been counseling, and Christ is called a wonderful counselor. And so there's merit in therapy, there's merit in counseling, and I think where it gets sort of bastardized or hijacked with the secular world and with the left is making it um, unconditional positive regard and making it very person centered. And for me, my experience has been anytime I made something person centered and made it about me, it got worse. And I'm like,
Mm,
once I started making it about others and serving others and focusing less on myself, and it's not that I didn't have needs, it's not that I didn't need help, but those things didn't matter as much anymore because I had people to serve. I had something to do. I had something that was bigger than me in my purview. And with secular therapy, and that kind of leads into the left, I see a lot of this is about me, and I need to feel good, and it doesn't matter if I hurt others. It doesn't matter if I step on other people's toes. It doesn't matter if I have to
mm,
upend these institutions. I mean, we've seen it infiltrate the church. And
mm.
I think that probably leads us into a little bit about your book, The Woke Mind, just sort of it's 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 more than just shaping your worldview. It seems like this leftist ideology, it's borderline a religion for them from what I see.
Yeah, I mean, John McWhorter would say not even borderline, like it is a religion, and
Yeah,
the way I would look at it varies. I would say not everyone left of center is a fanatic. I mean, I think your average moderate Democrat is not like what I would call woke.
right.
But it's kind of like there's like inner circle to outer circle if you're looking at it. So if you were to look at Christians, there's probably some like offshoot of Christianity that's like David Koresh or something, where it's like we're willing to kill and die for
Hmm.
this, right? Um, and then on the far other end of the spectrum, it's like, yeah, if my family's going, I'll go to church on Christmas and Easter. You even have atheists who say God bless you. It's just kind of what we do
Yeah.
here. In the same way, there are like Antifa or different woke people who are like, I'm willing to kill and die for this cult, this religion. But there's also people, kind of moderate Democrats, who are like, I put my pronouns in my email sign off because that's just kind of what we do here. Like an
Hmm.
atheist saying God bless you. So I think it's a cult that has different levels of influence. So there's certainly like a core. I think in my book I say maybe 7-8% of America is like what I would call like genuinely woke. But the woke influence kind of has a spillover trickle down effect where there's people who kind of go along with a lot of this stuff, even though they don't necessarily believe it, but it's kind of the polite thing to do, or it's best practices in therapy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think the rub is that 7 or 8%. Because I mean, I have friends that are Democrats, I have friends that are liberal, I have friends that are way more conservative than I am, and I'm like, oh, tone it down a little bit. But I think the 7 or 8%, that's where a lot of the damage is done, and we're a little bit unprecedented in TikTok and Instagram Reels, where it's just constantly fed to them. And I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she mentioned Charlie Kirk, and had some differing views with me on him. And I'm like, this is almost like we're talking about two different people. You're being fed, I feel like you're being fed a completely different story about this guy than I am. And I don't know where that's going to come from other than where we're getting our information from. And I wrap that around to therapy, where are we getting our information from as Christians, as believers? Our faith and scripture informs us, right? And it informs us about what we're supposed to be doing, what we're not supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to look at the world. And I did a study, and I actually this was probably about 10 years ago. I preached a sermon on this. Um, they took a bunch of marketing people, they took Android people and iPhone people, and they put them in an MRI. And they studied their brain, and they flashed like Apple products, and they would kind of write down like what part of their brain lit up, right? And the same parts of their brain that lit up were the same parts that lit up if you went to church and you heard a truth about Jesus and you were like, oh, that makes so much sense. It was the same parts of the brain that got them excited about it. They literally physiologically had a religious experience.
It's part of your core identity.
Yes. And now I'm
Wow.
looking at these kids watching TikTok, watching it, and not just kids, adults. And they're having these dopamine hits and these sort of religious experiences where they are not just influenced. It's not just like, oh yeah, okay, you convinced me. They're not being sold on it. They're having a visceral physiological experience. And once I read that, I was like, this is going to be bad because TikTok wasn't a thing yet. Instagram Reels hadn't really blown up, and I just had a gut feeling. I'm like, if this catches on, it's not going to be good for our kids and for adults either.
Mm. Wow. That man, that is really interesting. Yeah, I would guess there's like a similar inverse of that to where, I looked, I think I referenced one study in my book where if you put like devout liberals an fMRI and then expose them to like conservative ideas, there's like different parts of the brain light up. Part of it's like for negative emotions, and part of it's like parts of the brain where it's like there's a threat to myself, like my
Mm.
physical body. Like so I think when we talk to like postmodernism, post-structuralism, like language creates reality, language can be violence. Like there's a part of you that legitimately does believe that that language is violence. If I say there's only two genders or something like that, part of me lights. If I'm a woke person, part of me is like on a brain level, like lighting up as though you've like physically attacked my body.
Yeah, and naturally the sort of animal side of us is self-preservation, right? We need to
Mm.
react, we need to protect ourselves, we need to fight. And I guess that's where that fight or flight kicks in. I mentioned I spent a lot of time in juvenile justice, the mental health field. Um, in your clinical setting, um, what you're doing now, and I imagine you speak somewhat carefully about this, but where do you see this kind of overlapping the leftist ideology, the woke mind, um, influencing the counseling world, the therapy world? I've been out of it for a little bit, and so I imagine it's gotten worse, but I don't know. I don't want to assume. So if you can speak to that a little bit.
So where I'm at now for my internship at an addiction rehab, very, very little, if at all.
Okay.
In the addiction space, it's extremely pragmatic.
Mm,
You've got people that are basically their lives hang in the balance. You better come up with something that actually works to help give them, help them stay sober, give them some kind of relief from their mental distress. Like, you can't just kind of opine about the philosophy of intersectionality. That's not gonna,
yeah.
you have to actually do something that works. So in the addiction space, it's very pragmatic. A lot of people that actually care about the clients are in there. Generally speaking, in like addiction treatment centers, people are not there to make money. They're there because it's fulfilling. They work you really hard in addiction treatment, and a lot of people get burned out pretty quickly. So the people are there. They're there because they find a sense of fulfillment with it. Um, but in the therapy profession as a whole, like in grad school and other professional organizations, the APA, ACA, National Association of Social Work, they're all just it feels like the social justice thing is in the forefront of our minds. And if we get to client care at some point, that'd be nice, but it's not a necessity. It's kind of how it feels.
Yeah. Yeah. The addiction space, I have a good friend, Ed. He runs um, he's a addiction counselor. Shout out to Ed, Logos Addiction Counseling. And he kind of roots his idea in the logos, the word, right? And he's very much said that too. It is pragmatic. That it's let's get to the nuts and bolts. Let's, you know, there's not a lot of time to philosophize or explore what's going on, and a lot of hurting and broken people out there. I don't know what it, um, you know, Phoenix, where I'm at, fentanyl and addiction, it's hit hard. I mean, I was at opened the gym this morning, and there's been a guy, homeless guy, that's been kind of camping out in front of our gym every morning, and say hi to him, offer him some water, and sometimes he's doing okay. Sometimes he's not doing okay. And this morning, I mean, he was yelling at nobody. He's pacing in the parking lot and yelling at nobody. And maybe you can therapize me a little bit with this, but I wrestle with like empathy, and you need to go somewhere else, right? Because the faith side of me, the Christian side of me is like offer the guy some water, pray with him, ask him how he's doing. And then there's the sort of pragmatic side of me. It's just like you need to get off. This isn't good what you're doing. Let's see if we can figure out how to get you off of this. So how does that pragmatic side, how does your faith inform your practice, and how does your faith inform how you view people that are addicted? And you have a personal experience with it, so I imagine it's sympathy and
Yeah.
empathy is a little bit easier for you. Addiction runs in my family. I've had an uncle that died of an overdose. It's not something I'm totally unfamiliar with, but it's not something I have a personal experience with. So how does your faith inform
I
that?
I guess in terms of like my internship where I'm at now, I mean, there's two things. One, I have that personal experience, so I know what someone's going through, and I think that allows me to connect with them very quickly because a lot of times they might say something, I'm like, no, no, this actually behind that is the real issue, and I can get to that really quickly. The other thing is like I have an extra motivation since becoming a Christian because each person is made in the image of God. That's a child of God. God knows every hair on their head. He called them by name. And, I saw that with certain people, you can see the image of God a lot easier than you can in other people,
Yeah.
and you have to constantly kind of come back and remind yourself of that. Another issue, I work on the safety team at my church. I'm kind of like the mental health guy on the team. And so we have a lot of special needs people, some people with addiction, some homeless people. And the question is like it's a balance. So we want everyone to be able to hear the word of God preached in the sermon, but also we don't want someone disrupting another person's ability to hear the word of God. So there's certain people who have like yelled at and intimidated and threatened people. And so it's like, hey, you can't come in the doors, but we'll bring you a cup of coffee and a donut when you come. We
Mm.
want we want to treat you with the love of Christ, but we're also protecting, like as shepherds, we're protecting the rest of the flock.
Yeah.
And there's other people, some special needs people who are want have good motives and want to hear the word preached on a Sunday, or we also have Saturday services. Um, but that I'll have to sit with them during the service to make sure they don't like talk loudly during the service, like, hey,
Hmm.
let's inside voice. um but it's kind of it's a play it by ear because different people need different levels of care, and some people it's like I think the empathetic thing to do is to keep you outside because we're trying to protect other people. But even for those people, it's like we want to show the love of
Yeah.
Christ to you. So there's different levels of how you treat people, I guess.
And that, I mean, that speaks to Jesus met with people, the tax collectors, the sinners, the people he wasn't supposed to meet with, I think. And that gets that gets used against Christians a lot. But it's like Jesus also told them, go and sin no more, right?
Yeah,
Change, go and
yeah.
sin no more. And I think we had an experience, one of our chapters in Florida, they had a similar our gym, our chapters, they had a similar situation where they had a woman coming, some she was schizophrenic and she was managing it off and on. She wasn't managing it as well as she could have been, or some support fell out, and she would have some episodes while she was at the gym. And the chapter there knew I had some experience in that. And so one of the things I told them was, if if all else, call the police if you have to, if you really feel unsafe. But there's certain things you can do, like blade your body, right? Because if I come at you and my shoulders are broad and hey, you need to calm down, that's only going to escalate. And I'm like, it sounds cheesy, but I'm like, blade your body and just ask them if they need anything. Just be soft with them until it's time to not be soft. And I think that one, that keeps everybody safe, but that kind of shows them love, right? It shows them like, hey, I know you're going through it right now, but we don't need to escalate this. Let's keep everyone safe. It popped in my head because we're doing a similar thing with our church, going through a safety team. And hey, what do we do if this happens? Do we have a plan in place, and do we have people that we can call on? And I've had experiences in the church where, and we kind of talked about this earlier, mental health and faith, they're sort of on opposite sides of the Venn diagram when they don't necessarily need to be. Um, do you have in your circle, in your faith circle, it's kind of something we're building out, resources? My friend Ed, he goes to our church. He's a resource for addiction, and we make it known if you have anybody in your family or in our immediate church that is struggling with addiction, Ed is a resource. I'm studying nouthetic counseling right now, so using the Word of God to counsel people, kind of
Mm.
pastoral counseling, but the specific category is like nouthetic counseling, and sort of making the Word of God paramount in my counseling practice. What has been your experience in the church and mental health? Have you been able to sort of counsel or bridge that gap between the secular therapy and the faith-based therapy?
Yeah, I lead the men's addiction recovery group at my church, and it's certainly easy to incorporate. Like it's a little, you have to be more delicate the way you phrase things at my job because it's not like a Christian rehab. So we use a lot of AA higher power type language, but you can kind of make that a Christian higher power. Like you can literally just like quote the Bible and stuff like that,
Yeah.
as long as you say higher power. Um, but in church, my church is very, very good about incorporating mental health. We just finished a sermon series called Neurotheology, where they talked about the role of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, what this
Wow.
plays, and they're, quoting different parts of the Bible. One of the things I loved, one of the pastors did a sermon on Elijah. So he's got like, God rains down fire from heaven, takes up the offering and everything like that. He's like, that's a spiritual thing. But then right after that, Elijah runs away and God tells him, eat a hot meal and take a nap. And he goes, that's
Hmm.
also a spiritual thing. And I love that, how it's like, it's not like this body is kind of divorced from God in some sense. Like my body and my brain are also creations of God, and I need to kind of use those in the most uplifting way as well. And taking care of myself, taking care of mental health is a spiritual act.
Yeah, absolutely. Jesus went off in the wilderness and prayed, went off by himself and had
Mhm.
moments of solitude, and we all need those from time to time. And his care and concern was very much with the not just the downtrodden and the poor, but it seems very evident people with demons and people that
Yeah.
were mentally ill and wrestling with things. And there's a lot of truth to that. And it's fortunate that we had people like you in the world that are willing to sort of bridge that gap. And that was one of the things that struck a chord with me was reading your posts and watching some of your podcasts or listening to some of your podcasts and the guests you've had on there. Um, it's been fascinating. And there's been some episodes where I'm like, wait, I lost the plot. I have no idea what they're talking about now because you guys go deep in some of your episodes with a lot of psychology and philosophy. And um, tell me about the woke mind.
Woke mind. So this is something I was woke for a number of years. Super into socialism. I like to joke that the furthest to the right I was willing to go was Bernie Sanders. Um, I was into Black Lives Matter, super pro transgender movement, all that kind of stuff. And I guess it started to kind of unravel, and I'm wondering, I still care about vulnerable people. I still care about people who are downtrodden, marginalized, however you want to say it. But I'm not certain that the way I'm going about it is the best way. And it was 2020. I went back to school, and that's when COVID hit. And I was at Baylor, and I'm much older than the undergraduates, so I'm kind of a culture shock in one sense. But I'm hearing just like the most bizarre. Like there's a professor who had said something about bathrooms should be segregated based on biological sex instead of gender identity, and the students are calling her a Nazi because they say she's erasing an entire people group. And I'm like, where am I? The director at this center said, one of our primary goals going forward is to decenter white men. And this is like my student job was at the Addiction Recovery Center. I'm saying, what are we doing here? What's going on? And I remember kind of my breaking point was right before I graduated, the Addiction Recovery Center started using their social media to promote Planned Parenthood. And I was like, what does this have to do with addiction recovery? Like, aren't we alienating different students? And I brought that to the director, and she said, well, the boat's only so big, I can't save everyone. In other words, like what she was saying is like conservative or moderate students are kind of not worth our time. Like, we're only catering to radical left-wing
Mm,
students. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just kind of baffled as to what I'm seeing. And, I also saw just a ton of people just like hating white men, and like some of them were white men. So it just seemed kind of performative. Like it seemed very fake
yeah.
and inauthentic. So I start, what am I looking at? First thing I read was James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose' Cynical Theories.
Hmm.
And I read, John McWhorter and, all these different people. And I start putting together like, okay, this is what I'm seeing. This is what's going on in the world. And I start writing about it. And I wrote five different books, kind of from philosophy, psychology, how this shows up in behavior, kind of case studies. And then I realized no one's going to read five books, so I put into one book, The Woke Mind. Um, and the basic gist of it is, wokeness is what I call fourth generation Marxism. So the first generation was Marx and his friend Engels were just kind of giving their theories that capitalism impoverishes people, and if we move to a socialist then communist system, it's going to uplift people, lift them out of poverty, liberate them, all these things. Second generation Marxism was the experiments that we saw, the Soviet Union, Chairman Mao, Castro, Pol Pot, all these people. And it was the opposite of what Marx predicted. Capitalism was flourishing, abundance, prosperity. It was true liberation. And in the communist societies, it was the most murderous and oppressive regimes the world has ever known. So third generation sought to make sense of that. This was critical theory coming out of Germany and postmodernism coming out of France. And they're basically like, you know, kind of if the facts are against us, then the facts are the problem. Instead of getting a new ideology
Mm,
that's more consistent with the facts, reality itself is to blame. So they start, critical theory is what I call activism posing as scholarship. So you've got these people who are trying to, rather than come to a factual understanding of the truth of something, they've got the answer in their head before they even start these
yes.
studies. Um, and in postmodernism, it's It's not, I think what it seems on the surface is what you call moral and epistemological relativism. So you have your truth, I have my truth. Who are we to say whose truth is really right? We all have our own truth. I think that's like it's like a smoke screen. It's like the opening move in a game trying to get you to let your guard down because they actually do believe in objective absolute truth. They believe it from a Marxist point of view, but they're not showing their hand right away. So that's critical theory and postmodernism. Those migrated across the Atlantic to American universities. And when they got there, they combined them and connected them to identity politics.
Mm.
So critical race theory is just critical theory and postmodernism applied to race. Same thing with queer theory, radical feminism. Then you got smaller disciplines like fat studies, disability studies. But that's the gist of it. And so the case that I'm making is a big part of these radicals are understanding, Herbert Marcuse was particularly bad about this. He's like, how can we get people to, he actually just says this overtly, how can we get people to support a revolution when you don't actually need one? He's very honest about like, we don't need
Mm.
a revolution in America. But he's like, how do we convince people that we do? And so he's like talking about we got to breed discontent. He calls it the power of negative thinking. So a lot of what you see in finding things and calling them problematic. We've created this worldview, especially where we're bringing young people in it. America is systemically racist. America's a patriarchy. America's transphobic, and you kind of give them all these ideas, and you say, "Well, it's everywhere," and you can't see it right away because it's kind of invisible to us. So you have to let us teach you how to see it, to where
Hmm.
you're kind of looking for it everywhere. This oppression is around every corner. And then we're surprised when people start to, these younger people start to have higher anxiety, higher depression, climate anxiety, or, people, especially people of color, afraid that cops are just going to randomly shoot them, which almost never happens. But they develop this fear because they're told that's the regular state of police in this country. Um, and then you've got people burning down cities or tearing down monuments. And this is it's not like an unintended side effect. This is a logical progression of this philosophy is kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's the tricky part about revolution is it has to have an end goal, right? Otherwise, you're just left with rubble. And it
Mhm.
feels like to me all of that ramping up, what is the end goal? And it feels like to me the end goal is just rubble. They don't care what gets built back up because if you're going to have a revolution, you're going to destroy a society or you're going to destroy a framework that has built up and sustained a society for however many generations. You better have something in its place, right? And to me, I don't know what their end goal is. It's sort of like, they're burn it down and then okay, now what do we do? Now where do we go? So is the end goal we're going to put in a new system of communism, and then the cycle's just going to repeat, or is the end goal
So
just
that that's
chaos?
yeah, that's essentially the end goal. Like some form of socialism and then communism is always the end goal. But they can't explain actually what real because real socialism's never been tried. So
Yeah.
they can't explain what real socialism is. I first discovered this concept in the book Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, and they're referencing people like I think Frederick Jameson and Slavoj Žižek, who have these quotes similar. I think it's approximately. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So this is actually a very common Marxist theory that capitalism has so colonized our minds that it's impossible to imagine what a socialist society would look like. So we need to destroy capitalism
Mm.
in like this process of destroying capitalism, like that will change us in a way that will reveal to us what we need to build next. So I don't know if you remember back when it was Speaker Pelosi said we need to pass the bill to find out what's in it. Like that's essentially like the Marxist argument here. We have to destroy capitalism in order to find out what comes next.
Mm.
And that's a huge leap of faith, especially, kind of the way they're framing it is nothing could possibly be worse than this. But if you read a book like Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker, we live in an incredibly good society. We are
Yes.
free, there's abundance, there's prosperity, science, technology, medicine, like so many good, amazing things in this world. And they've convinced themselves nothing could be worse than America.
I had that thought earlier that there's I'm having this experience now where I have a couple good friends and my brother has had a uh, ups and downs the last 10 years. I mean, suicide attempts and things like that. And um, he's really questioning a lot of things about left and right and religion and faith. And he's talking about wanting to come to church and things like that. And so it's been a pretty amazing. But he's got friends on the left, and I have friends on the left, and I have friends that are have dipped their toes in that ideology and dipped their toes in that sort of Marxist framework. And one thing I've noticed is none of them are happy with anything. It's I have a child, um, but there's this and this and this. I only have a child, and but there's also this patriarchal framework, and it's because the West has colonized this idea of family and blah blah. But I'm like, you have a family. Why are you putting your family in that category of like, oh, they're a burden. Oh, I only have a family because I was told I have to, and things like that. And so I just I see him, my brother, kind of deviating away from that. And I have people on the left that I'm just like, you mentioned it. Everything is patriarchal, everything is racist, everything is sexist. And I don't understand how you live that way other than brainwashed. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to use that extreme term because I'm like, that doesn't feel good to me to say they're brainwashed, but there's no there's no nuance, there's no reasoning with a lot of them, it seems like.
No, no. I mean, I would suspect like the arrow of causation is bidirectional. So I think people with a little bit of instability, some natural anxiety or emotional instability, are like, why do I feel like this? Why are my relationships suffering? Why have I not done as well at work as I would have liked? Why am I not making as much money? And then you kind of come in with this kind of prepackaged ideology that explains it. It's essentially a theory of everything. It explains everything. So you kind of have this intersectional approach where it's like, the white men develop this capitalist system and that oppresses everyone, and then racial minorities are second class citizens, and women are basically property, and you've got transphobia and gender's a construct, blah blah blah, and you've got like this whole worldview that explains all of why you're suffering. And when you adopt that worldview, that mild level of depression, anxiety, whatever you were experiencing, it spirals out of control.
Mm,
And now, like, I'm seeing suffering that's not actually there, but it's everywhere around me,
yeah.
right? And I have this whole new I mean, it's like you're living in this just like a horror movie at all times because you're taught to see things
Mm.
as though it is like this just horrific hellscape.
I think add to that, you compound that with they're told nothing that happens to them is their fault. And
Mm.
that was so one of the most insane stories. This was why I left social work, where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. Um, I wrestled a lot with I taught life skills. So kids that were coming out of foster care, coming out of a group home, they were aging out of child services and into adult services. Some of them would go to SMI services, and my I dropped off at that point. But if they went to general mental health services, things like finding a job, are you doing your laundry, are you brushing your teeth, things like that, just checking in with them and making sure that they're keeping up with their basic life skills. I was working with a case manager, and I said, well, how do you want to address this with this particular client? Because he's supposed to get a job, he's supposed to get a job, he's supposed to get a job, and we're doing job applications. I'm helping him get clothes for his job interviews and things like that. And he could not get a job, and he couldn't stay sober either. And it's like, okay, so where we want to practice empathy, but we also want to hold him accountable, right? And the idea was like, well, we can't hold him accountable. And I'm like, that seems backwards to me because having this conversation with the case manager, if we can hold him accountable to a certain degree and something is his fault, that means he can fix it. If everything is not his fault and everybody's against him, he's done for. If something is his fault and he has something to be like, okay, I need to correct this action and fix it, then at least we give him something to work toward. And I think a lot of people are told nothing is your fault. And I had a particular case. Case manager asked me to work with this young lady, and we were pretty sure that it wasn't going to work, but it was worth a shot because the risk was sex trafficking. She was involved in it and was not only being trafficked, but was recruiting.
Mm,
They got her to be a recruiter. And there is a rally here in Arizona, Bikers Against Child Abuse. And what happened was she went to that rally and was had a basically had a burner phone and was recruiting children at the Bikers Against Child Abuse rally. And I said, was working with the case manager. She went to ASU. I don't know if we should hold that against her, but very, very liberal. And I said, you know, as a man, as like a husband and a father, I was like, this is hard because I want to help this young lady. I don't want this young lady to be sex trafficked. And she told me that my desire to save a young lady from being sex trafficked was not save, but prevent it was because of the patriarchy. And I was like, I can't do this work anymore. This is not, I can't fight this fight anymore. And it blew me away. And I said, well, thank God for the patriarchy then.
yeah.
And we got along. It wasn't like a hostile relationship. We got along professionally. And we liked a lot of the same music. We liked a lot of the same movies and things like that. So I really enjoyed partnering with that case manager on cases. But when she told me, hey, I'd like to do all I can to stop this young lady from being sex trafficked. Well, that's because of the patriarchy.
It's just so wild to me. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me in my marriage and family counseling class, I had to read a book called The Ethical Slut,
Mm,
which is kind of like, the way they frame it is like monogamy is this outdated puritanical norm that we need to evolve beyond and all become polyamorous and have open marriages and things like that. And like, it seemed like a form of gaslighting. If someone didn't want that, it's like, oh, you need to kind of overcome your jealousy, and it's like, it seems like such a natural thing to want. But back to this idea, I feel like most people come into addiction recovery with some degree of a victimhood complex, you
mm,
know, and there's a saying in that you hear in recovery in regards to accountability that's I care enough about you to call you on your BS.
yeah.
In other words, like I'm going to say something uncomfortable that might make you disturbed a little bit, but it's because I want to save your life. And it's very well understood how that goes about in the rooms of recovery. Um, one of the things I love about CBT is one, it acknowledges that objective reality is real.
Mm,
That you have to concede that it's not really about my truth, it's what the facts are. And secondly, it concedes that I have the ability to take control of my life. Like I think that's such an empowering message. And so much of what I've gotten in grad school is so disempowering. You're a victim of the patriarchy and cis heteronormativity and capitalism and white supremacy, and like this message is preached just nonstop. And whether I'm working with black clients, gay clients, like whoever, for me to come to them and say, here's a toolkit for you to take control of your own life so that you're not, engaging in behaviors that are keeping you in bondage. Here's your tools to be the architect of your own life. They're so grateful for that because those tools are so empowering. And that just seems to be just lost on so much
mm.
of the therapy profession.
Yeah, especially with younger people. I think of the example of Christ meeting the woman at the well. And
Yeah.
he says, go get your husband. And she says, I have no husband. So he doesn't have to shame her. He doesn't have to call her a slut.
Hmm.
He lovingly redirected her mind towards something else, right? And she
Hmm.
said, I have no husband. At the end of that interaction, he says, go and sin no more. And I don't want to discount victims. I mean, there are very real victims. There are people that have been victimized. But when you take it to that nth degree of not only are you a victim of things that really did happen to you, you're a victim of these abstract things, this boogeyman under your bed that, you really haven't seen, but trust me,
Hmm.
it's happening. And where my faith informs me, I see the serpent in that. Well, you won't really die. It's these
Hmm.
subtle whispers and these subtle tricks that or infiltrating people's minds. And I think, with all of the Charlie Kirk stuff happening and with um, you know, the meme culture and I see a pivot though, because I after Charlie Kirk was shot and I coach gymnastics in the evenings and I coach a lot of young adults, a lot of teenagers. Um, there were quite a few adults that I interact with, and they were sort of like, yeah, I don't like Charlie Kirk. He was racist, he was sexist, blah blah blah, but I don't think he deserved to die. And there were young adults, there were teenagers that were like, "What are you talking about? Like Charlie Kirk's amazing. Like he brought civil discourse. Like he went to college campuses and talked to people and tried to interact with them as peacefully as he could. I mean, some of the conversations got heated, and these were women, these were kids that were Asian, these were girls, these were boys. And even my own son was like, "Yeah, I don't understand why somebody would want to kill him. Like he's 14." And so I think I'm hopeful there's a turn. I'm hopeful that not all hope is lost. I don't know if you're feeling the same thing. I mean, you're still in the fight, so I think if you're still your voice is still out there and you're writing books called The Woke Mind, I think you obviously believe not all hope is lost.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I notice in my church is busting at the seams every weekend, and it's predominantly younger people. Like probably at least half of the church is people in their 20s and teens. It's like a very young church, and it's just, I joke that on Sundays we're gonna have to cut a hole in the roof and lower people down, because there's some Sundays when every chair in the building is taken. We've taken the pastor's desk chairs and random couches and set them up in the lobby. People watch on TV.
Mm,
It's just I think there's a return to people going to church. So on the faith perspective, I definitely think that's something that I see. On the politics perspective, I don't even know if it's necessarily a return to conservatism, but it's a return to pragmatism. Like a
mm,
lot of the things that we're told in wokeness, just A, they don't logically add up, and B, they don't work in real life. And one of the most obvious things is, gender is a social construct. You should be non-binary and reject traditional gender roles. If you want to date, like you should probably be aware of traditional gender roles. If I'm wanting to date a woman, there's a very good chance she's looking for masculinity as a trait.
mm.
If a woman's wanting to date a heterosexual man, there's a good chance that he's looking for femininity as a trait.
Yeah.
You can pretend like those things don't matter all day, but if you actually want to get a date, if you actually want to date and marry someone, those things are going to matter at some point.
I I agree, and I tend to be a little bit more than some in my small circle. I tend to be a little bit more egalitarian. My wife runs her own business. She's amazing. She's the breadwinner right now because I'm doing ministry, and we all know you make a lot of money in ministry. So um, she's the breadwinner right now, and I want to champion women that are in the workplace and are crushing it because I think that's awesome. And maybe, I don't know, people might call me a feminist for that or whatever, fine. But where I get confused is gender is a social construct, gender roles are a social construct. Okay, fine. I can kind of connect the dots and see how you come to that conclusion. What I don't understand is how you can simultaneously say we need to champion women and we need to lift up women and women are oppressed, but these people hesitate to define what a woman is. And it's such a simple cognitive dissonance that I don't understand how they don't go, wait a minute. Wait, maybe I need to rethink some things. Some of them double down. And it's like, well, a woman is whatever, you think it is. And it's like, well, then what's the point of lifting women up in the workplace? What's the point of the WNBA? What's the point of the the ladies professional golfer tour? What's the point of having these spaces for women if you're just going to erase women as as a thing in society? Um, and being in gymnastics, it's I don't want to say it's a female dominated sport, but there are a lot of women in gymnastics. A lot of the young ladies that I work with that are amazing athletes, and I want to lift them up and I want to champion them. Um, and I work with some girls that are 14 and they're squatting 205, and it's cool to see these girls embrace their femininity, but embrace it in a way that is powerful. And I don't want to erase women. from society. I like my wife. I like my nieces, you know. Um, I don't know if you see a lot of that in your world or if that's resonating or connecting some dots with you or
I mean, you definitely see a lot of that perspective in grad school. And I think, I talked to Mia Hughes, who's the one who authored the WPATH files, and she had a very interesting perspective where it's like, I think a lot of people would even, there's certain people that are your hardcore true believers that they would never say this. I think they actually do believe it. But for most people kind of on the left who think gender is a social construct and biological sex is irrelevant, all this kind of stuff, they're playing a game of pretend, and they know it's a game of pretend. Um, and they think they're doing it to be polite because you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
mm,
And so if you say, hey, women's rights matter, you say, what is a woman? There's like this panic button, like a panic going on in the head, not because I don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about, but I have to switch which game I'm pretending right now, right? I have to switch to from the feminist game to the trans game when I'm playing pretend. It's like, oh, a woman is whoever says they're a woman, right? And like I know that's nonsense in my head, but I know my social capital, my social standing is dependent on me playing that game.
yeah. I love that idea of social capital and social standing and there's currency in having the right opinion and having the right worldview. And you see that in conservative circles too. The second you dip your toe in any kind of liberal water, you're called a commie. You know, you see it in
Mm.
the extreme right too, however you want to define that. Um, and I think again, that speaks to, you know, like I said, I hesitate to use the term brainwashing, but it speaks to that idea of even if this line is blurred and even if this line is vague and you don't know where the line is, you better toe the line.
Mm.
And how am I supposed to toe the line if I don't know where the line is? And you spoke to it earlier where I think they have to switch which argument they're having, but I think there's that sort of fight or flight that kicks in too, where I either need to just walk away and say, well, I'm not going to have this conversation and walk away, or I need to double down and call you a name and call you transphobic or call you homophobic or racist or sexist. And it's this, they default to fight or flight and almost a childish like state where the arguments don't even make sense. I know you are, but what am I? You know, it's terrifying that that's happening in academia, in
Yeah.
universities that are getting public funding.
I think a lot of this comes down to like the fundamental contradictions of intersectionality, and probably the biggest one
Yes.
is Islam. That's the easiest one, the most obvious one to see. And there's a lot of unwritten rules. You have to know what these unspoken rules are before you engage in the discourse. So if I'm, coming from a traditionally feminist perspective, I think, I have to speak out against repression of women, or if I'm like old school gay rights, I have to speak out against I think there's like 9 different Muslim countries where they execute gay people. I have to speak out against that. But if you're familiar with intersectionality, you have to know
Hmm.
there's this hierarchy within intersectionality. So post-colonialism, non-Western societies are better than Western societies, and critical race theory, darker skin's better than lighter skin, to kind of invert the historical oppression. Um, you have to know that post-colonialism and critical race theory are more important than gay rights and feminism. Like that's not printed anywhere. You just have to
Hmm.
know it, right? So you have to know I can't speak out against Islam because it comes from these non-Western societies that are generally darker skinned. And so I'm just going to have to let the women and the gays kind of be a sacrifice essentially for the greater good of intersectionality.
Yeah, it's almost I see it a lot, and you can take this on a micro level. I see it a lot in dealing with the individual where it's like, well, they don't know any better. And it's sort of like infantilizing, where it's like, well, they don't, it's because they're a non-Western society and because they're this, they're that. It's because they don't have access to all these resources that they they kill gays and they don't champion women. And it's like just like you said, but you're pro women's rights, you're pro gay, you have this instinct to want to protect them, but you're defending this society that kills them, that oppresses them.
And they're also bashing the science that they say these other countries need.
Yes. Yeah, it's sort of the I mean, a smaller version of it, it's sort of the voter ID argument, right? Well, they're too dumb. They can't get an ID. I'm like, I don't understand. They don't have access to it. And they're like, no, we do. You can just go get one. It's not hard, you know. And
Yeah.
again, I don't want to discount because I've seen it doing the work. And I think that's where you and I sort of have unique experiences where we've been in those circles and we've been in those rooms where people are saying, I have to sit through a DEI meeting and I'm told that white men are bad. And I'm sitting there as a white man, like, well, this is awkward. You know, and we've been in those meetings and we've had those fights and had those conversations where, um, you know, I think it's there's something to there's a particular kind of evil of telling people that they're helpless and convincing people that they're oppressed, and not only that, convincing people that it's this particular group's fault. And there's I don't know what else to call it other than evil. We put it's Marxism, it's these leftist ideologies, but where my faith informs me is, and I get hesitant to call it evil because I'm like, that's a heavy word to use. That's a heavy four-letter word. But I don't know where your faith informs you politically on that. Do you see it as a particular evil, a trick of the devil, or is it just something that's purely political, I guess?
I try to be weary about assuming that God thinks politically the same way I do. I think
Mm,
that's a dangerous road to go down. But at the same time, I think there's certain things that I can back up and say, for example, like communism is the most murderous and oppressive ideology in history. Is that something Jesus would like? Like, probably not. So you hear people, oh, Jesus was a socialist. Well, Jesus might have advocated like two people sharing with each other, but I don't know that he wanted a society that like functions so badly that people starve to death. That doesn't sound like
yeah.
something Jesus would want to me. In the same way, like you definitely see Jesus crossing over gender lines, crossing over ethnic lines. To me, that seems like a very like MLK approach of judging people by the content of their character rather than like external characteristics. But this idea of like, who are the oppressor identities? We need to hate them to balance the historical scales. That does not seem like very Jesus to me.
Yeah.
And then when I also see like this ideology, how it colonizes people's minds. It creates I mean, paranoia, emotional instability, anxiety, but also just like a bitter, resentful hatefulness. Like when I look at the effects of it, when I look at the fruit that this tree produces, it certainly doesn't
Mm.
seem to me like something Jesus would endorse. Again, like I don't want to be like too hard line to assume that I'm speaking for Jesus. But to me, just the Jesus I read about in the Gospels certainly doesn't sound like what I'm seeing. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's easy to think, well, Jesus sounds like me and thinks like me. And that's a comforting thought, but I know it's not true. But where I see, you know, the socialist Jesus and where I see that connection, like you said, he advocated for sharing and advocated for peace and went to marginalized groups and things like that. But he almost always brought it back to the individual's heart. Who do you say I am? Not we need to upend this patriarchy, this society, and completely change everything. He brought it all to an individual level. And I think that's where things like where church and where things like not ostracizing those friends and families that are on the left to the degree that you can, not completely ostracizing them out of your lives and still having conversations with them because there's there's still room for that. And you know, if we completely shut them out, it's only going to grow. But I think at the same time, if we look at, you know, like I said, friends and family that are on the left, having that one-on-one interaction with them and being like, sort of putting that in a political framework of who do you say I am, right?
Mm.
And putting it on that individual level instead of, well, the left, the left, the left. You got to put it in a framework, and so our minds can make sense of it, and so we have a conceptualized idea of what we're talking about. But the left is a spectrum too, right? And
Yeah.
just like the right is a spectrum, and so I love the idea of whittling it down and just getting to the individual and getting to people's hearts, and winning them to. Christ first and foremost, and if there's a little bit more conservatism and a little bit less of the woke
Yeah.
colonial colonized mind to be had there, do it on an individual level.
Yeah, I would say like my primary politics are monarchy.
Okay.
I believe that there's one king and his throne is not in the Oval Office.
Mm.
Like my kingdom is not of this world. Secondarily, almost as an afterthought, I would really like it if my country was not totalitarian. So long as I understand what's first and I'm putting Jesus first and that my politics come second, I think things will shake out. Maybe not like how I would want, but how is best. And I see people on the left and the right, like I did two different episodes on this in my podcast. One on what's called liberation theology, which my friend Katie Kernodle calls Marxism and Catholic drag, where it's like, predominantly Marxism, but there's this little bit of Christian aesthetic in the background. And I see that on the right with what they call Christian nationalism, where these politics are primary, but also kind of we want Jesus as a little bit of an aesthetic here in the corner. And I think any politics that doesn't, for me as a Christian, that doesn't put Jesus first is missing the mark.
Mm. Yeah, and that's the rub with labels too, is again, we need a framework. We need labels so we can put things in a framework, and that's where, the rub with labels come in is you say Christian nationalist, and it's like, well, I like the country. I'm nationalistic in that sense, and I'm a Christian. So, well, I must be a Christian, right? And there's again, there's a spectrum to be had there. But um, I think pointing people to Christ, and I think first and foremost, of that monarchy mindset, that's a good place to leave it. Ryan, where can people find you? Where can they support your work? If you have anything else you want to chat about or plug, or the floor is yours.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Ryan Rogers on YouTube and Twitter X. The predominant place that I post is X, but also I post all my videos on YouTube as well. And I got The Woke Mind, which is available on Amazon. And then my podcast, which you can find YouTube, Spotify, any of those type of platforms, is Reality Therapy.
I love it. Reality therapy. Like I said, I've listened to a few episodes, and I'm like, I got to chat with this guy because I found myself taking notes and looking up terms. I'm like, what does that definition mean? And I'm college educated, but I've been out of that circle for a little while. So, Ryan, I appreciate your time hopping on with me. It's been cool to follow you and get to see your work, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thanks, man.